morning. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here with you in this beautiful green place. I also come from another beautiful green place. You may know us as for not having an RV, for biodiversity and ecotourism, for being the so-called happiest country in the world, or simply by our Pura Vida mentality. What I want to do today is that I want to share with you a new way in which we're starting to look at ourselves as partly as a product of this carbon neutrality commitment that Costa Rica undertook in Copenhagen and that we are trying to take seriously. Many countries undertook carbon neutrality commitments. Most of them have stepped back. It's not clear whether it's a feasible commitment. It's really like saying, if I don't get 100 in the test, 99 is not good enough. But anyway, I think it's important that the country is trying to do this and to take it to its limits. And that's what we're trying to do. We're starting to look at ourselves, as I said, as custodians or stewards of a very unique stock of carbon that rises in the middle of the oceans and joins the great land masses of North and South America. And it is not just any carbon. Our carbon, like great wine, is laden with a rich bouquet of biodiversity and more than a hint of fresh water. So it's very unique. There is no methodology for carbon neutrality, so we're going to have to make one up or develop one as we go along. But to give you an idea of the challenge, our terrestrial carbon stock is rather limited because we only have 50,000 square kilometers of land area. We have 10 times more in the oceans, but on the land area is rather limited. So the carbon stock is in the order of 800 million tons. And our emissions, yearly emissions, are 12 million tons. We're already one of the most efficient countries with respect to carbon intensity. And we have only the per capita emissions of India, for example, to give you an idea. So this is not an easy task, but I think it's very important. What we have to do to reach carbon neutrality are basically two things. One, we have to manage our carbon stock well, and two, we have to reduce those 12 million tons of emissions that come mostly from transport, from agriculture, from housing, waste management, very little from energy, because we have 95, or had 95% renewable energy already. So it's a big task because we can maybe cut down to half the emissions in agriculture, in transport, in waste management, etc. The rest we have to make up with sequestration. We have not always managed our forest well. And you may be more familiar with the so-called street trees of Costa Rica that you see in the picture. For over 50 years, we lost about 1% of the forest per year. But 25 years ago, we started in a process of developing policies to try to slow, reduce, and eventually reverse deforestation. And we have now, Costa Rica looks a lot more like this or that. We have gone back to 55% forest cover after being on the order of a low 30%. And how have we done this? Well, we have done this through through a variety of policies. Restricting land use change was very important. Extending the system of protected areas of the official national park system, very important. There's over 600 private reserves in Costa Rica, very, very important. Payment for ecosystem services was also very important. If we go to the Payment for Ecosystem Services program, that started about 17 years ago, but the biggest boost was the approval of a carbon tax in 1997, 15 years ago. About 3.5% of the price of fuels goes to the fund to pay for ecosystem services. And it pays for about half of the program. The other half of the program has been financed largely with loans from the World Bank and GF grants. But it's all not very sustainable in the long run. You cannot, Costa Rica is the only country in the world that has taken loans from the World Bank for payment for ecosystem services. Okay, that gives you an idea of where we are. And I am partly responsible for that because when the finance minister came to me a few years ago and said, this is absolutely crazy because it's not sustainable. But we said, well, there's an international agreement coming and we want to be first, we want to be the ones who have really done it, we're ready to implement it, you know, and that's how we have justified it. We have justified it as a preparation phase for a global carbon market that will hopefully come. Unfortunately, I'll reflect about that a little bit at the end. One very important thing is that Costa Rica has invested over $400 million in this program. Covers over 600,000 hectares, more than 9,000 land users, 10% of the program in indigenous peoples areas where they implement the program communally. So we have a lot of very rich experience. But this $400 million investment does not appear anywhere in the national income accounts of Costa Rica. And this is an example of why the WAVES partnership is so critical. You know, we were doing basically the ecosystem accounting in the 90s using the methodology of the United Nations until the present, and at that time we were still losing forests. So the GDP, corrected GDP, would be depreciated. And the president of the central bank at that time found out about this, and his solution was, let's stop doing ecosystem accounting. But now, since we're building forests, the change will go the other way, and the GDP will be higher, and hopefully the central bank will be more inclined to continue doing it. But anyway, this is what happened. Okay, let me show you our REDD strategy and what we're trying to do. Many of you, I think, or all of you are familiar with REDD, reducing emissions by deforestation and forest degradation. It's really our hope in the international arena. And Costa Rica is really the proof of concept for REDD, and we are partners in the FCPF. And so we are preparing our strategy. And what we have done is look at what has happened since the year 2000. And you can see there, and I could also show you, but I don't want to complicate it, the methodologies that we have used to calculate this. This is basically satellite going from Landsat to Spot to the newer LiDAR technologies. But what I want you to see that is the baseline is without payments for ecosystem services, and then you have the amount of carbon that has been sequestered from 2000 to 2005 and 2005 to 2010. Why Did we do this? Well, because we thought, the world would follow very closely. But unfortunately, climate agreement is being delayed and delayed, and therefore, the early actions, we will not very likely ever get any credit. So, 37 and 54 is 91 million tons. This is what our negotiators call Costa Rica's gift to the world. We have fixed in that time 91 million tons. We have really gone from 700 to 800 million tons. It shows you that our stock can be managed sustainably, can be grown, but not unlimited. We can never reach 900 million tons, even if we force the rest of Costa Rica. So that's very, very important. Because although this is a great success, there is no other country that can show this. But it's absolutely threatened. It's absolutely threatened because Costa Rica is now in a deficit situation since the 2008 crisis. Therefore, the finance ministry has very large difficulties financing the program. They're only doing it because it's a commitment with the World Bank and they have to. But once the loan ends next year, it's not likely that they will continue. The REDD partnership and REDD financing is therefore critical to us. But that's also very slow in coming. And now we're working on delinking the REDD financing from the convention itself so that we move ahead. And we're working with partners like the Coalition for Rainforest Nations and many others to try to do this. But this shows you that even in Costa Rica, where we have had an important success, without international negotiations, we're not going anywhere. When people ask me, would you recommend to another country to do what you have done? I would probably have to say no. Costa Rica is very unique, and we have paid a very high development cost. It's making the Costa Rica leader and showing the way, but many other developing countries cannot afford that luxury. Certainly not many in Central America. Now, I would be crazy if I just talked about mitigation, which is what I've been doing, because mitigation is very exciting. But the real cost of climate change is coming through adaptation. And I want to give you just two examples very quickly. One of them is Costa Rica has been tracking the cost of hydrometeorological events for 25 years. And from 1988 to 2009, the average cost of these emergencies was $80 million per year. In 2010 alone, the cost of hydrometeorological events rose to $400 million. There was a period of time when there was one bridge falling every day. Right now, we are experiencing what climate change meaning to Central America and to parts of Latin America is a higher frequency of El Niño, La Niña combination, which is a devastating one-two punch because we have droughts at the same time that you have extreme events all mixed together. I can give you two examples from our hydro projects. Two projects have been flooded before being finished. And we have now a $1 billion project that just last week, Revencazón, the future generating power station was flooded during construction because of extreme events. The drought in the US now, etc. Well, I don't have to belabor the point, but the cost of climate change to developing countries are really devastating. And we cannot forget that. And that should be something that makes us work harder to reach this agreement. Now, I've been in this business for over 35 years. And I agree with Hal's assessment of the biodiversity versus climate change conventions. But the progress in climate change is truly visible. At the last meeting, after the negotiating meeting, after 2 weeks of meeting, the great agreement was that right before closing, they elected a chair and co-chair. And this is where we are. We are really at a standstill. And we have to do something to break this climate stalemate. And there's no more important place to do something than in the United States. Because the world is effectively trying to reach agreements without the United States, which is sort of the absent partner in this climate coalition. I don't want to leave you with despair. I think my greatest hope comes from seeing all of you here and seeing how these ideas have grown. We still have a long way to go in changing the economics, the mainstream economics, to take into account the ecosystem view. But I think that we have a big challenge ahead, and I hope that all of you are up to the task. Thank you very much.